In this world of crazy competition and constantly shifting alliances, you have to wonder, how does any leader really chart a course for their country? Well, today we're going to decode the strategic blueprint of French President Emmanuel Macron. We're breaking down his big vision for innovation, for sovereignty, and really for France's role on the global stage.
So it really all comes down to this one fundamental question. In a world totally dominated by giants like the US and China, especially when you talk about technology, how does a nation like France even begin to compete? Macron's entire strategy, really, is this incredibly ambitious answer for how France can not just keep up, but actually lead.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to kick things off with the core vision itself. Then we'll dive right into the plan to close that innovation gap in tech. After that, we'll look at how France is trying to attract global talent, we'll zoom out to see the big picture on geopolitics, and finally, we'll get a little more personal and look at the hopes and fears that are really driving the man himself.
Okay, let's get into it. The Macron vision. Look, to really get what he's trying to do, you first got to understand the man himself. He's this interesting mix of traditional, but also super forward thinking. Think about his visit to Mumbai. He just breaks protocol to go for an early morning jog. I know it sounds like a small thing, but it kind of perfectly captures his whole style. Direct, maybe a little unconventional.
All right, so the first major piece of his vision is this idea of closing the innovation gap. And Macron is surprisingly blunt about why Europe has fallen behind. I mean, where are the European versions of Google or Alibaba? He's not afraid to say it, and he has a really clear diagnosis of the problem.
So he really boils it down to three key challenges. First up, a lack of scale. I mean, Europe is a massive market, right? But it's all fragmented into individual countries, which makes it tough. Second, the money. It's not that Europe doesn't have capital, it does, but people's savings aren't flowing into those high-risk, high-reward tech startups. And the last one, and this might be the biggest, is the mindset. There's kind of this cultural fear of the risk-taking and the failure that Silicon Valley was literally built on.
So how do you fix that? Well, his solution starts with a massive statement. 109 billion euros. That's the investment going into France's AI and tech infrastructure. And look, this isn't about just patching up a few holes. This is an attempt to build a completely new foundation for the future. Of course, its success is going to depend on a lot more than just cash.
And all that cash is aimed at a very specific idea, something called sovereign AI. Now, this is super important. The goal here is not to build some kind of digital wall around France. It's actually the opposite. It's about building up a domestic tech scene that's strong enough with its own data centers, its own talent, so that it can work with partners from around the world, but on its own terms, and all while keeping data safe under European rules.
Of course, all the fancy infrastructure and AI in the world is only half the battle, right? You absolutely need the brightest people to actually make it all work. And that brings us to the next huge piece of the puzzle, Macron's really aggressive pitch to bring the world's top talent to France.
And he's making a direct appeal, especially to students and entrepreneurs in places like India. The pitch is basically threefold. First, come get a top-tier education at our world-class universities. And yeah, we've got plenty of programs in English. Second, jump into Europe's most dynamic and exciting startup scene. And third, experience a culture that's totally unique, where art and life and innovation all just intersect.
In this quote, this really gets to the heart of that cultural shift he's trying to create. He's making this huge moonshot bet on quantum computing, aiming for France to be a leader by 2035. But he knows that to even have a chance of getting there, the whole country has to embrace a new mindset. One where failure isn't the end of the road, but just a necessary step on the way to something big.
Okay, so we've covered the domestic stuff. Now let's zoom out, because all this ambition at home is directly tied to a much broader vision for France's place in the world, a world that Macron firmly believes shouldn't just be a playground for two superpowers.
The key term for this whole idea is multipolarity. It sounds complicated, but it's a pretty simple concept with huge implications. It's about a future where power isn't just concentrated in one or two places. Instead, it's more spread out, where countries like France and India can team up, balance out the bigger players, and help shape the global agenda together.
And this slide just lays out the choice he sees for the world so clearly. On one side, you've got what he calls the order of the strongest, where big powers just dominate and everyone else has to fall in line. But on the other side, there's this third way he's pushing for. It's all about strategic autonomy, where countries can work together respectfully without becoming dependent on anyone, all based on the rule of law. But look, he's also a pragmatist. He totally gets that the US dollar dominates the global economy today. That's just a fact. But the long-term goal is super clear: to strengthen the euro's role on the world stage. Not by forcing it on anyone, but by making Europe more innovative, more competitive, and just a more attractive partner to do business with.
Okay, so we've seen the grand strategy, we've seen the vision, but what's personally driving him? For this last part, let's get a little more personal and look at the deepest hopes and, yeah, the greatest fears that really shape his worldview.
And right here, you see this incredible contrast. His biggest fear? It's a world where international law just completely falls apart. He points to Russia's war in Ukraine as this terrifying example of what could happen, something that could spark a whole new global arms race. But then, on the flip side, his source of optimism is just as powerful. It's the billions of educated young people all over the world who have the skills and the drive to solve these huge global problems.
In this quote, man, it really just sums up his whole philosophy. He doesn't look at all these massive challenges and see reasons for despair. He sees them as a call to action. His own mindset is one of constant motion, of always trying to build the future, not just sitting back and reacting to whatever happens.
Which really leaves us all with this final big thought. I mean, as the world seems to be fracturing more and more into these competing blocks, Macron is placing a massive bet. He's betting that the real path forward is through strategic independence, backed by a whole network of balanced partnerships. So the question for all of us is he right?